Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And for those of you that are either dialing in tonight live or that are watching this webinar on our website after the fact, a very warm welcome to you to listen to the vision that Catoctin Covenant Presbyterian Church has for what God is calling us to do in Western Loudoun County, in Purcellville, and the Northern Virginia region for the cause of Christ. I'm joined tonight by Pastor Ben Franks, and we're really excited for Ben to be able to take the time to be able to do this. I am Matt Strohmeyer. I'm one of the members at Catoctin Covenant Presbyterian Church. And Ben, we're just very grateful for you to take the time to be with us tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Looking forward to this.
Okay, great. So what we envision on doing tonight is just to walk through what is the vision that KCPC, Catoctin Covenant Presbyterian Church, has for intergenerational discipleship and advancing Christ's kingdom in Purcellville, Western Loudoun County, in the Northern Virginia area. And we want to just kind of unpack, what is that vision? What's been the history of that vision? And what really, strongly convicts us that this is the direction that God is really leading us? And then what is some of the fruit that we've seen? So that's what we're going to be walking through over the course of the next 45 minutes or so to kind of outline what we think God has in store for us at KCPC. So, Pastor Ben, can you first, just for those that aren't maybe familiar with KCPC, with this area, with what's going on here, can you just outline what is Catoctin Covenant Presbyterian Church?
Yeah, well, I can start by sharing a little bit about where we're located, because as you said, we are in a little town called Purcellville, Virginia, which for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the Northern Virginia area, we are about 50 miles northwest of Washington, D.C. So we're part of that Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. metro area, but we're kind of on the edge of the commuter belt. So there's a lot of people in this area who aren't necessarily from here originally, but have moved here for different career opportunities, military things, and defense contracting, whatever it might be. And especially in Western Loudoun County, there's a lot of people who kind of have moved to the area, but they want to put down roots. They want to just stay here. So they tend to come out our direction and raise their families. And so we're in a broader area that's packed with people, very transient, a lot of people in and out, but also in kind of a corner of that area that is a bit more rooted. And I think our church has kind of reflected that in some ways over the years. We'll talk about our history here some in a moment, but we've been ministering in Purcellville and in Western Loudoun County for more than 20 years now. And we are a congregation of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, which is a small denomination that is Bible-focused, Christ-centered evangelical church. We as a local congregation, as part of that broader group, are very much self-consciously reformed and Christ-centered. We want people to understand the riches of the Bible. So we've always put a big premium on biblical teaching and preaching, trying to disciple people, trying to help people, not just as individual Christians, but to be discipled as families and as a community. So the church as the church is an important thing, not just a club for Christians, but as a place where we're formed into the image of Christ. And so we're a very ordinary means of grace, simple kind of church in this pocket of the broader DC area. And when you look at kind of the composition of our church, when you look at the group of people that God has brought together, it's a very interesting dynamic. When I'm talking to people, other pastors or things, and trying to explain the dynamics here, I've already talked about one where, in a sense, we're kind of doing small town ministry. Purcellville is about 10,000 people. In another sense, it's big city ministry because a lot of people are working in DC, and we're in that broader kind of pot culturally. But also in terms of just the composition of the congregation, we have kind of a blend of people, I would say. On the one hand, there's a core of families who kind of fit the description that I shared, of people who have moved to the area and they put down roots. So we've got families who have been here for almost the whole 20 years that we've been here. And a number of those families too have raised their kids here, and their kids have grown up and gotten married, and they're having kids and they're members here. So we have a kind of group of families that are very rooted, not just in Western Loudoun County, but in the ministry of KCPC. But then we also have kind of another contingent of people who are always rotating through. So it's sort of long-term and short-term members because, as I said, there's a lot of people who kind of come through here for a season. We were just having on Friday night a send-off for a wonderful family who came here on a military assignment, were here for a number of years, and now they're moving on to their next assignment. So we always have that kind of dynamic. And we also have a lot of young professionals and college students who may be here for a few years for work or a few years for study. And so our congregation kind of reflects that we've got kind of one part of the congregation that's very stable, they're here long-term, others that are really with us for a few years. And that'll come out in terms of our vision, that we think that's part of the unique opportunity that God has given us to minister to those who are here for a season and kind of have an impact beyond just our immediate borders, but we can get into that more as we go through. So
No, that's great. That's very helpful. I think certainly our family fits one of those molds of a family that has recently come in and that has really wanted to put down roots in this area very much because of KCPC and the gospel ministry going on here. I know we certainly have been just struck by the Christ-centered teaching, preaching, ministry, like really whole of life kind of a feel of Catoctin. Can you talk to what the history of gospel ministry at Catoctin?
Yeah.
We've only seen it for about 2 years, but in the last, the 2 decades this has been going on, how that's evolved and what that's looked like.
Yeah. So like I said, we're part of a broader network of churches, a denomination called the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, which has a number of churches in this area. And if you are familiar with Northern Virginia, if you look at Route 7, one of the main kind of highways through there, there's an OPC church kind of coming out from DC about every 20 or 30 minutes. And Catoctin is sort of the westernmost edge of that. And that was, we were started about 20 years ago, 2003 was when the church was initially formed. Dick Ellis was a kind of home missionary working to plant churches in the area. And he began a Bible study in the area that then called a man named Charles Biggs, who was the first pastor who helped to kind of form the church and then who very faithfully shepherded the church for almost 20 years. And that emphasis on, as you put it, just that Christ-saturated, Christ-centered teaching and preaching, that desire to really give people the meat of God's word and to see people grow up into the mature manhood of Jesus Christ, as Paul puts it in Ephesians 4. That is very much something that he helped to work into the DNA of the church. And the families who have been at the congregation for many years are evidences of that, families that are very well rooted in the truth. Something that I've also seen reflected in the history of the church. And my own story is I won't get into all of it, but I was a member of the church as a college student back in 2009. So it was only a few years old at that point, long before I was involved in any sort of ministry thing. And what I saw then and what I've seen since from a distance and then now as the pastor is that God has formed a community here that on the one hand is very much centered on that robust theology and teaching. So that's very central. But it's also a congregation of people who are eager to see that lived out, eager to see that applied. So it's not just a church that's about the head, it's the head, it's the heart, it's the hands. And there's a community of people who are quick to show hospitality, quick to share the gospel with their neighbors, quick to help those who are in need. And it's really that kind of whole-orbed ministry that has developed over the years. We see that maturing process taking place, but it's something that by the time that I got here to minister full-time, this was already just part and parcel of the DNA of the church. And there was a lot of maturity and gifts that God had given that I think we're now in a position of being able to kind of share more broadly. It's given us sort of a base from which to minister.
That makes a lot of sense. So transitioning to that kind of vision of where we believe that God is leading KCPC, that first element of that you mentioned already, we have a pretty large student population here at KCPC. We have Patrick Henry College, which is a major fixture of the Purcellville area. Can you talk through that vision? Certainly, we've already seen it started to be played out since we've been here, but just just discipleship of individuals, no matter what their walk of life is, families, and then bringing that discipleship out into the community, out
Yeah.
into the families of, Western Loudoun County.
Mm.
Can you talk through that vision of intergenerational discipleship?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word discipleship helps us to think about how we approach that it is about being a learner or a student. And fundamentally, we're sitting at the feet of Christ. We're learning from his word. And so as we think about how to pursue discipleship, that begins and ends with the word of God. And probably the kind of front line of that is the public teaching and preaching that takes place, from the pulpit each Lord's Day. And so we put a big emphasis on that. And we recognize that God works through his word. And this is always how he has worked. And so we have a big emphasis on that kind of formal teaching and preaching, the discipleship for our kids in Sunday school, for our adults, for the congregation as a whole. And we try to keep our families as much as we can, present and involved in the congregation, because we realize this is where God has put his means to give us his grace and to grow us up in that. And then really flowing from that equips and encourages us to then continue that ministry of discipleship in all sorts of areas. So one of the things that I have appreciated about Catoctin is that the families take their role of discipleship seriously. It's not just viewed as something that the church is supposed to do for families, but that the church does it with the families. And so we try to help people have the resources and information they need to be, leading their kids in family worship, to be educating and training their kids, to be having those conversations. And not only for those with families, but for those who are singles, those who are college students, those who are retired, creating opportunities for fellowship and hospitality, where there's can just be that cross-pollination and encouragement happening organically. So there's a lot of, even though we live in an area where people can be spread out, so there can be challenges there and people can be busy, I think the people at Catoctin I see recognize that discipleship and fellowship is a priority. They work to make it happen, and they work to not just sort of be able to receive it themselves, but to be able to give it and share it with others. And so we see that coming out in all sorts of ways, formally and informally, in terms of the ministry of the church.
That's great. So the college ministry specifically, can you talk to that and how Catoctin tries to minister to the needs of a lot of these students that come from across the country,
Sure,
and come to this great college here, PHC?
Yeah. So for those who are not in our area, we are in the same town. It's a small town, but we're in the same town as a school called Patrick Henry College, and which we're not formally tied to or anything, but the school was started in 2000. We were started in 2003. So we've sort of grown up together. I think pretty much from the beginning, we've had at least one or two professors who have been part of the church and part of the school, and we've always had some students. Sometimes it's just a few. In the last few years, we've really seen that ministry kind of explode, and we have now probably 30 or 40 students who attend our church, which is about 10% of the student body. Patrick Henry is an evangelical Christian college that is really focused on, and even though it's only 24 years old, has had an amazing record and reach in terms of trying to give Christian young people a very robust education. The vision really grew out of people recognizing that, you look back at the history of the Ivy League schools in this country, Harvard and Yale and Princeton, they're all Christian schools who were founded to advance the cause of the gospel. And yet you can also go through those lists of schools and see how they have turned completely on that mission and are no longer motivated by those concerns. And so Patrick Henry kind of started to say, we need as Christians to be pursuing that space, to try to be having the best education and training up Christian young people to be able to go into every area of life and have a real impact on society, on the culture, on the church. And so we have a Christian college here that tends to attract leaders, tends to attract people who are interested in going into all sorts of different spheres and serving. And one of the exciting things for us then, as a local church, has been to see so many of those young people coming and worshiping with us for a number of years. And it gives us a chance to pour into them and to help shape and form them at a really, transitional, important time of life. We can all remember those college years and just how much you grow and sort of take shape in that season. And so we've been able to kind of working off of that base of just mature, faithful ministry over many, many years. I think we've now been positioned to be able to shape and impact those young people.
Mhm.
And we do that in a number of ways. Like I said, these young people are coming to our Sunday school, they're coming to our worship services, they're sitting under the teaching and the preaching, but it's more than just a kind of information teaching station. One of the things that we've been able to do is to organize a meal after every morning service. A different family will host the young people. And when that first started, it was, you were hosting 5, 10, 15 students. Now you're hosting, 40, 45, 50 students. It's very much grown, and we've had multiple families kind of teaming up, but it's been really great because these are young people who are hungry for a church family and community. And so those meals are places where people are building those relationships. They're processing and talking through the sermons. In fact, one of the things that was cool to learn about after the fact, we didn't organize this, but we have some sort of evening gathering pretty much every Sunday except the third Sundays because we do a church-wide fellowship meal in the afternoon. And then I found out last year that the students had taken it on themselves to organize an evening get-together on that night where they would get together and sing psalms and talk about the sermon series and things. So they're very, very hungry and very, very eager to learn and to grow. And a lot of these young people, if you're coming from a Reformed background, as we are as a church, a lot of these young people are not necessarily coming from a Reformed perspective. And so they're thoughtful, mature young people who are looking for depth. And I think they're finding that in the kind of Bible-centered Reformed teaching that we're trying to share with them. So it's just been neat to see that chance to be a church that God has poured a lot into, and now we're able to pour that out on others who are going out into all sorts of areas of society.
Absolutely. I've been just struck by the number of individuals, families, students that Catoctin has sent essentially out into all walks of life, of government, like whether it's military, whether it's government civil service, whether it's, as you mentioned, defense contract, government contract. I mean, just public policy leaders in government, in the judicial system. So just an immense amount of different walks of life that I think at least I've seen just in the last 2 years that Catoctin's really prepared a lot of these students to be able to advance the cause of Christ and spread the gospel in all those different spheres.
Well, we just, we came to the end of a school year, a week or two ago, and we just sent out, another batch of students. And I was talking to one of them just on Sunday, and this young woman was getting ready to move to Texas to do a PhD in philosophy, working on the problem of evil, for apologetics. And the week before that, I was having lunch with another student who's, starting an internship with the FBI this summer, and someone else who's working in journalism, and others who are graduating and they're teaching in, classical Christian schools. And so that is very much, I think, part of the vision that God has given us, that, we as a church don't want to sort of think that we as a local congregation have to have a program to do everything, or that we're the tip of the spear for the culture war. That's not our calling. Our calling is the ministry of the word and training and discipling God's people. But what we are praying for, what we communicate to our people is God has given each of them vocations and has given each of them opportunities that we as a church as a whole may never have to minister in different ways. And I think we've seen that really throughout the 20 years of our history. And we're seeing new opportunities for this now, where we are able to be the church and be focused on the things that Christ has called us to, but also be reminding our people, God has given you resources, God has given you things that you are to share with others, that you are to pass on, whether you're working as a journalist, or you're working in the defense industry, or you're a stay-at-home mom, or whatever it might be. God has given you a platform and a field for ministry. And so we're ministering to people, but our hope and prayer and what we've seen God doing is that it's giving us an opportunity to minister through the different vocations that people have. And so, we're a small church in many ways, in a small town, and yet we can sort of see the ripple effects all over. And that's really exciting.
That is very exciting. I think, at least as we think about, the area that God has positioned Catoctin in Western Loudoun County an area that can sometimes conjure up thoughts of, of negative things.
Right.
But I think we've been encouraged, at least since being here, just seeing the amount that it seems like God is just advancing the kingdom in this area, the amount that churches are growing, the thing that, that those kind of things are happening. Can you talk to that at all for its fruit and the last few years? Like, what have you been seeing here at Catoctin in this area as far as growth and
well, and this is really one of the drivers for wanting to do this webinar tonight, is not so much to sort of shine a light on Catoctin and say, we're the ones that God is working through. It's more to say, I was talking to somebody today, having lunch with him, and we were just sort of processing about, there's a lot of discouraging things in the world right now. There's a lot of things that if you are an evangelical Christian, it's easy to wake up and feel like, is God at work? And I think one of the things that's been exciting to see is that, we're, very much in the proximity to a lot of the bad things that are happening. And yet we have seen God work in our church. We see God at work in our sister churches throughout the region. We've seen other like-minded gospel preaching churches who are reaching out. God is doing things. God is at work. And I think we as Christians need to have our eyes open for that. We can be very good at seeing the things that are wrong, the things that are discouraging, but we need to also see the things that are encouraging. And oftentimes it's in those kind of out of the way places, or the places you wouldn't think to look. And so we see this as an opportunity to sort of just shine a light on, hey, here's a few examples of what God is doing in our area. And I think we have seen some of this. We've seen a growing number of families come. So, throughout our 20-year history, God has slowly kind of built the church. And for many years, we were a small church of around 100 people ministering faithfully. And I really think that was a season where God was just sort of shaping and deepening a people for himself, and a very faithful and fruitful ministry. In the last several years, we've seen God kind of expanding upon that base. And so now we're having, between 150, 180 people that are worshiping on a Sunday morning. Of course, being in a college town, that kind of can go up or down depending on whether the students are here or the students are gone. But even apart from students, we've seen other families coming in. We've seen more people from our local community, so it's not just people kind of commuting in, but people who are here in Purcellville, in Western Loudoun County, who are coming and they're hungry. We're seeing more people who aren't just transferring from another OPC church to us, but who are just looking for a Bible preaching church, looking for a place that preaches the gospel, and are finding a community here where they can learn and they can grow. And we're continuing to see, I think, a lot of those people coming in, and really not just coming in as kind of consumers, but coming in with their sleeves rolled up. They're looking to work, they're looking to serve, they're looking to minister, not only within the body, but outside of the body. And we've had opportunities over the years, and we've been able to kind of pursue these even more in the last couple of years, of partnering with other ministries in the area that work with those who are in poverty or in need, or to do outreach events with local parades, or handing out Christian literature, things like that. So we've seen God kind of give us the resources we need just to try to be serving the community that God has put us in. So it's been really exciting to see.
Oh, that's great. When it comes to the, what God is doing, even more broadly, you mentioned before that kind of KCPC was the westernmost outpost of these kind of OPC churches. When it comes to the vision of expanding and church planting and spreading the gospel and being used by God to expand Christ's kingdom in this area, can you talk through the vision of that, what that looks like, what we're seeing as far as?
Yeah. Well, some of this goes back to the history of KCPC, that we were ourselves a church plant, and recently enough that we can remember being a church plant. And so I think from the get-go, the thought process of the leadership and the congregation has been, we were a church that was planted. We want to be a church that plants churches. I think for many years, that was just sort of something that we thought, well, someday in the future. And in God's providence, Charles Biggs, who, as I said, had helped to plant this church and pastored for many years, left a few years ago to do church planting work for our presbytery. So he still lives locally, but now he's doing church planting work full time. And since we have had such a rich relationship with him over the years, I think that just put church planting kind of back on our agenda. And we began to think of it not just as something that maybe we could do someday in the future, but maybe something that we need to be considering more now. Because part of our vision has always been that we don't want to be a big church. God works through all sizes of churches, so nothing unbiblical about big churches, but there are changes that happen. And when you kind of get above that 200 or 300 member mark, you get to a point where you can't know everyone in your church. And if you are trying to shepherd a flock of more than 300 people, you have to do it very differently. You have to almost kind of create churches within the church that people are part of and that you're connecting with. And that's just not really what our vision or goal has ever been for KCPC. And so I think those two things, realizing that, okay, God is helping us to grow and that's exciting, but we also don't want to just kind of grow and become a huge church. And this thought process and prayer for years of pursuing church planting, those have kind of come together for us. And so it's been exciting to see that God has created some opportunities for us to pursue this. So actually, you can be praying for us if you're watching this. Our presbytery, which is kind of the broader circle of churches we're part of, is pursuing a church planting Bible study kind of in the next town over. So I said we're the westernmost edge. This will be kind of in the next town over, a little town called Berryville, Virginia. If you're in Berryville, reach out to us and we'll get you connected with this. But we're going to be starting a Bible study with the goal of seeing if that will grow into a church plant. And so our presbytery is kind of spearheading that, but they're working with us as a local church just to be praying for that, to be maybe having some of our people be involved with helping to get that started. And it could be that here in the next 6 months or a year, that's something that kind of grows into a church plant. And we might at that point be able to kind of adopt that as a daughter church, or at least be involved in supporting it as part of a broader presbytery. But we're seeing that opportunity already. And I think because we are kind of on the edge of our presbytery, there's a number of communities, probably 4 or 5, that are within striking distance of us that I think we could be used to help plant churches in. So that's part of our vision and goal is be grateful for the growth, but also be kingdom minded about the growth, not just wanting to get bigger ourselves, but to say, okay, God is giving us something to send out. And that's always God's way. He gives us things so that we can give back, so we can give to others. And that's the New Testament pattern that we want to embrace and continue at Catoctin.
That's so great. It's been super encouraging and exciting for our family, at least, since getting here and seeing that that focus. Are there some ways when it comes to the fruit that we've already seen related to kind of expanding Christ's kingdom, both locally here in the community and then even more broadly? Are there some ways that we've seen fruit in that area, whether it's ministry to families locally or sending people out into other vacations and walks, ministry or fruit that we've seen that's come of that in the last,
There have been a couple of things. I would say probably 2 areas where we've seen this. One is institutionally. So we've been able to minister to a lot of people through whom God has raised up different institutions that are working for the kingdom. So I won't name names to embarrass people, but we have people who have they've written homeschool curriculum that's being used, Christian homeschool curriculum that's being used around the country. We have people who have helped to start classical Christian schools that are self-consciously evangelical, Christian, and reformed in our area. We have people who have helped to start co-ops and speech and debate clubs, and who are serving on the boards of different Christian organizations, and people who are doing work for the kingdom that's not just individually driven, but that has institutional heft and weight to it. Sometimes, often at a local, sometimes at a national or even international scale. And that's exciting as a fairly small church, to be able to be impacting people who are working in that way. So we've seen that institutional reach on the one hand. We've also seen it, though, at the individual level, that there have been obviously people who have come through and been discipled and trained up here, but also a lot of people who have come and then gone out and who are now serving as pastors. We have several young men. When I was a student here, there was a group of several of us that attended the church, and 3 of us are now pastors, 2 in the OPC, 1 in the PCA. And of course, I get to be the pastor of the church that helped put me on a path to ministry 15 years ago. So that's been exciting. We've sent people off to the mission field. We've sent a lot of young men to our denomination has something called the Timothy Conference, which is designed to help college students, college men, to discern if they're called to ministry. And we've been able to sponsor a number of those over the years. And so we're able to be a place where people who are being called to minister in different ways can come and be discipled and be brought up. And sometimes they stay and they minister here, and sometimes we're sending them back out. And that's part of the challenge, because you always have people in, you always have people out. And so the tendency is don't get too attached, don't invest too much, because it's hard to say goodbye to people that you love. And it's also easy to sort of think, oh, well, they're not going to be here long term. And I think what we've tried to prayerfully do is to sort of challenge ourselves to say, let's have a kingdom mindset. Even if someone comes and they're only assigned here for 2 years, or they're only a student here for 3 or 4 years, and we know they're leaving again, that's okay. Because we can minister to them, we can help disciple and shape them, and then they can go out all over and carry forward what they've learned. And so it's having that kind of mindset where it's not so much about building the kingdom of Catoctin, it's building the kingdom of Christ.
Yeah.
And we often won't get to see or receive the immediate fruits of that, but that's actually, it's not just okay, it's actually good, because it helps us remember it's not about us, but it's about us being able to serve other churches, other parts of the body of Christ, because he's put us in a place that in God's providence, people are coming through.
Yeah.
And so it's part of the ministry that we have.
That's great. Yeah. It's actually, it's quite exciting to, see this not only vision for intergenerational discipleship, to see this vision for expanding Christ's kingdom in this area, in this specific area of the country, which is so, has so many different things going on in it that are influencing, the culture and things like that. But it's also really encouraging, exciting to see the fruit that has come of it over the course of the past 2 decades that this has been going on.
Yeah.
So are there things that as we look at this, the vision that you've articulated here for those things, are there things that are we well suited right now to be able to meet that vision, to be able to accomplish what we believe God is calling us to do?
Yeah. I think in many ways, God has given us so much as a church, and we're so grateful for that. And I think, it's good to remember the church is the people, first and foremost, and God has brought some wonderful people to us. We've seen encouragements on that front, even recently being able to have new elders ordained, new deacons ordained. So we've got just a group of godly men who are leading as officers, godly men and women who are mentoring and discipling and teaching. So there's a lot of fruitful ministry that's taking place. One of the challenges that we're facing right now as we think about how to do the ministry God has given us, and especially if God continues to grow that ministry in the way that he has over the last couple of years, is that we are currently sharing a space with another church. So actually we're recording this right now in the sanctuary, so you can sort of see a little snapshot. We have a beautiful space that we meet in, and the church that we are kind of renting from have been amazing hosts. However, we realize this is probably not going to be a long-term home for us for a couple of reasons. One is we're already finding an issue with size, especially when we've done our Sunday schools and things. We're at a point already where we can't fit all of our adult Sunday school class into a classroom. So we have one classroom full. We have an overflow classroom where we kind of pipe the audio and video and that's there. And oftentimes that's full. And we've had people like sitting in the hallway kind of between the classrooms trying to just catch what they can. And so that's exciting at one level, but it also is a challenge for ministry. And we lack the space to be able to just bring everyone together, have that discipleship, have that back and forth. We're finding already, even in the worship space, which is larger for us, that we're getting closer to filling that up already. And when we do our fellowship meals and things, we found that we can't all fit in the fellowship hall. We have to kind of spill out into the hallways and things. So there's some kind of growing pains there that are exciting problems to have, but there's still challenges that we face. And as we think about if the Lord calls us to grow in our ministry to college students, if God continues to bring families from the area, we're going to be facing a situation in the next few years where we have to really kind of rework how we try to do some of the things that we do. And so that's one of the challenges of our current space. Additionally, we have the challenge that as I said, we share with another church, but actually there are three churches that meet in this space right now. There's a Christian school that meets in this space, and then a host of ministries throughout the week, which is wonderful. The church that owns this building has a very much a kingdom mindset that's been inspiring and a very tangible blessing to us. But it also means as we try to minister, we're fitting in with a lot of other people, and there are things that we would like to be able to do that we can't really do because we're one of many ministries using this space. And something that we were able to do at our previous space, which we rented, but we kind of had the run of, was we were able to not only do our own ministry there, but provide a space for other ministries to be housed, which if you're familiar with this area, you'll know that's a real blessing because real estate is very difficult to find and very expensive. And the cultural climate overall towards kind of conservative evangelical ministries is not always warm, if I can put it that way. And so having a space, not only where we can be, but where other, co-ops or groups or, things like that can have a space for their own ministry is something that we'd like to be able to do. And obviously we can't as we're living in someone else's house, so to speak. And I think looking at all of that and also looking long term, we've seen God at work for more than 20 years. We want to see God continuing to work for decades and centuries, until Christ comes back. And as we look at that stability question, we see a need to find a more permanent space because we recognize that not only as our church grows, but also as this congregation that owns the building, has its own change and growth, we may not always be able to meet here. We may not always fit here. We may have other needs or challenges, or they may have other needs. And so we don't know that we can just presume that we'll always have a space here. And there's very few other possible spaces in our area. And so that's been one of the big, again, opportunities that God has given to say, how do we continue this ministry in a way that can be stable and fruitful for the long term? So that's part of what we've been working towards.
Yeah, that long-term kind of vision of, decades or even centuries of gospel-centered ministry in the area. Well, what would that look like? So if, we are in a process of trying to establish that permanent space to be able to do that. What do you think in 10 years, in 20 years, and what do you think that looks like?
Yeah.
What would if you would go to Catoctin Covenant Presbyterian Church, off Route 611, that space that we're thinking about right now, in 20 years, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, it'll probably look different than we imagine. But what I hope it would be that God would provide us with a space that could be our own, land that we own, that we can have in perpetuity, and a building where we could gather and minister as a church. Hopefully we'd be a church that, had grown, to be in that 200 to 300 range, that was able to be ministering in our community and be visible in our community. We've always been renters, and so people, even though we've been here a long time, sometimes people don't know where we've been because there's no kind of place to point to. And so to be a physical, tangible presence there, the property we're looking at, we're excited about in part because it's surrounded by homes and neighborhoods and developments. And so there's an opportunity there to minister to kind of our local parish in a sense. And so we'd love to be rooted in a particular place, a visible outpost of the kingdom, ministering the gospel in our neighborhood, and having that outward vision where we're planting churches, where we're discipling young people who are coming in, where we're pouring into our town and our community, and just being an outpost for the kingdom in Western Loudoun County. That's very much our goal and our vision.
Well, that's great. So hopefully this has been helpful for those of you out there, either live or that are watching this playback, and just to hear both what the vision is for Catoctin Covenant Presbyterian Church and the pretty strong evidence that we have of how God is already moving in this direction. If you're interested in learning more, we would very much welcome the partnerships as we are considering how to be able to move forward with this. And so we invite you to visit our website at building.catoctin.org. That's Catoctin with a K. And we'll pop up the link here on the video, but invite you to reach out to us, ask questions, and we're just excited to see where God continues to take this. So Pastor Ben, thank you so much for taking the time tonight
absolutely.
to walk through all this.
Absolutely.